Good afternoon, everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Sam Holland, and I work in the BEL team here at ABP. Today, myself and my colleague James Thompson will be facilitating this roundtable event on virtual site visits. We'll be joined by several academics who have graciously agreed to take part, and together we'll hopefully have a fruitful conversation on the topic. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today. For myself, this is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I would like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Aboriginal people have been in Australia for over 65,000 years, which is an incredible amount of time. To put that into context, that's roughly 20,000 years before humans reached Europe. It's 20,000 years before the first musical instruments were invented, and indeed, it's during this time that lower estimates are given for the development of structured language around early humans. Pretty remarkable to think about. But today's story is not about early human development, it's about virtual site visits. And here are some objectives that I hope we might achieve. Firstly, to kind of identify the pedagogical value of these things. VSVs, as I might refer to them as. Why are they valuable? Why should we care? We'll explore the application of VSVs in ABP and beyond, and kind of situate them in the larger context of site learning. Just a note, this session won't cover kind of the technical details of producing a virtual site visit, but if you are interested in that, we're happy to kind of co-create virtual site visits with you, so please get in touch after the session. So the way I thought this might work, I'll give a brief overview of VSVs and built environments education. We'll then hear from some ABP academics who have been using these tools as part of their teaching, and wrap up and have a quick Q&A. So the site visit, the traditional site visit, as I'm sure we're all aware, they're kind of a fundamental aspect of built environments education. They're deeply rooted in the pedagogies of experiential and place-based learning and serve a range of pedagogical objectives. They promote interaction, they're great kind of ways where students and staff can communicate outside of the space of the classroom, and they expose students to the places and people with whom they kind of ultimately be working with. However, as I'm sure we all know, they're not perfect. There's a range of issues with site visits, such as the logistical headaches of organizing them, choosing the site, budgeting, getting access, etc. Often the sites are in remote locations, or they can be quite dangerous. Live construction sites are not the place for 20 students to be scurrying around. Students often need to revisit a site multiple times, which can be quite challenging for both students and staff to organise. So as far back as the early 2000s, educators had been looking for alternative ways to deliver site-based content, and one of these ways was to go virtual. So what is a virtual site visit? Put simply, it's a digital representation of a site which can be accessed remotely and asynchronously. They're created using a range of technologies, 360 photography, videography, LiDAR, game engines, to name a few. With these tools, we're now able to access site-based content whenever and wherever. This has obvious advantages related to accessibility, equity, safety, but I'll touch more on this kind of physical virtual divide later. So BEL+T engagement with virtual site visits began in early 2019, where BEL+T and a teaching team of an undergraduate construction subject co-created a virtual site visit documenting the stages of a construction build. Since then, we've produced over 50 site visits for all disciplines and curriculum levels in the faculty. And as a faculty, we kind of continue to produce these tools with a range of more and more sophisticated technologies. So a quick example of what a typical virtual site visit might look like. You have kind of a series of 360-degree photos or videos, which the user can navigate around. And then within each panorama, there's embedded information in the form of video, text, and other media, which the user can engage with. So right now we're looking at an interview of a site manager. Once they've engaged with the content in a space, they can then choose to move to a different location and then engage with the content in that location. And with this setup, we're able to kind of create a wide range of educational experiences. As well as creating these virtual site visits, BEL+T has produced a journal article which kind of looked at establishing a typology of these tools based on teaching and learning aims. So in this paper, we identified a range of motives for virtual site visits, including those developed to inspire and contextualize, those that demonstrate and demarcate, and those that ground abstract experiences via specific location. The paper really highlighted kind of the multifaceted use of these tools and also touched on their relationship to regular physical site visits. And so on this point, I want to touch on that topic of the kind of physical versus virtual site visit debate, which occupies a lot of this space. Often the two are compared against one another and are seen as kind of competing experiences. Questions are asked like, should we do a physical site visit or a virtual one? Now that COVID restrictions are eased and we can go back to site, what's the point in doing a virtual site visit? I think this line of reasoning is slightly misguided. The virtual and the physical site visit, the PSV, as we call them, they're kind of distinct experiences, each with their own affordances and challenges. By leaning into the affordances of each, we can create for our students a kind of a holistic site-based experience. So instead of asking virtual or physical, we can ask virtual and physical. So we can recognize that, these physical site visits are these great multi-sensory experiences where students kind of get to engage and make sense of this super dynamic and complicated environment. But often these sites can be overly complicated and students can be overwhelmed and kind of struggle to understand and comprehend what they're seeing. And there's so many factors outside of the control of us as educators, loud noises, distractions, just the inherent complexity of site that can detract from that learning. With a virtual site visit, we have a lot more control over these factors. We can choose to remove distractions and direct our students to focus on specific areas and aspects of site. This has obvious advantages, but in doing so, we must recognize that we're providing students with a distilled version of site. In this version, we've done that job of determining what is and isn't relevant knowledge. But we know that this skill of determining what's important is critical for students to develop as they'll be working in these environments as professionals. So now that we've identified some affordances and challenges, what might that kind of holistic site-based approach look like? Well, I've got a kind of 12-week hypothetical subject here. And let's say in this subject, we have a physical site visit in week 3. What we could do is provide students with a virtual site visit in week 3 to introduce them to site and point out kind of introductory concepts that we deem important. Now, when students go to the site, they'll be more prepared and less likely to be overwhelmed. Then we could follow that with another virtual site visit afterwards to kind of refresh student memories of site and allow them to revisit it when they want to. So we can kind of see that everything is, it's serving different purposes, but by understanding the affordances of each approach, as well as the kind of the reasons why we're doing them, we can kind of map out this kind of holistic site approach. So this comes to the end of my spiel. Now let's move on to the interesting part, which is talking to our colleagues about their experiences. As I mentioned previously, there are lots of ways that virtual site visits can be used to support learning. So we'll take a look at some examples and hear from some educators to see the different approaches and look at specific contexts. We'll hear from 4 colleagues about 4 virtual site visits, each unique in their own way. The way I thought this might work is I'll just show you a snippet of the virtual site visit first, so we have a sense of what we're looking at, what we're talking about, and then I'll pose a question or two, and we can have hopefully an enlightening conversation. So, Kirsten, I might start with you. I'll share my screen. So this is a virtual site visit that Kirsten and I co-created of a archive in Cydonia,
Yep.
near Lane. Um,
Yeah.
and so, yeah, you explore the space, you look around, and then as you're doing so, you can kind of click on different objects to learn about that space, learn about the architect. So Kirsten, could you give us some context into the subject
Yeah,
and
sure.
why you decided there was value in a virtual site visit?
Yeah, so I guess, I mean, first of all, we were we were working on the Greg Burgess collection in between lockdowns. So this became sort of necessity. So I think I went up there and put that together. It must have been in between lockdowns. Um, so also it's a remote location. So Sidonia's about 35 minutes outside of Kyneton. Usually when we run the elective, it's February, which also means it's in that period of time where we often have um, uh, high fire risk, and so it's very limited in how people can access that. It also is the logistics of getting you know between 20 to 40 students to the archive. Usually we have to do that in two batches because we can't fit that many people in there. Um, and it's on a part of a working farm. So it's also making sure that so it's a sheep station. So Noel Henderson had studied here, and Midzi was able to organise this amazing um, place to store Greg's archive because it was about to go into a skip because he'd sold his office. And so part of that was 400 models and hundreds of tubes of stuff and drawers of things. That man kept everything. So it's a really interesting resource in terms of because it also for me, it's particularly interesting because it covers that hybrid period where it's that transition from analog documentation through to digital. And because he's kept everything, it's also really good to test those out. Um, with the archives, it was really valuable having this the virtual tour because it meant that, I mean, not all students were able to get there. And also we can start to put some it becomes it's not only for the students who aren't able to make it, but there's a document, I guess, very similar to the project that you showed between sort of, week 1 and 12, having sort of reminders of what's there. I think, Sam, the one that you didn't show was there's a box in which there were lots of spiders. And I did ask that no one open that for the next 3 years, because I did check on the lifespan of spiders. We have lots of spiders and birds and other creatures that are in that space. The other thing I think that was really valuable with that is that because it is a collection of models. Often they're taken out and are used for different exhibitions and things like that. So that also has a record of what was there. And uh, the balance with the Burgess Archive, well, it's not really an archive, it's a collection because there isn't the funding to keep it as an archive. And so we're finding that a lot of the models are deteriorating. And so the records that we have kept them in quite pristine conditions. We also see this as a way where, some students can contribute to further developing the virtual tour and can add their own research to that. So as we slowly start to unpack a lot of the boxes and digitize things, because our focus was really on protecting the models first. And now we're starting to open up a lot of those drawing tubes. And so there's a whole sort of spectrum of work from the early 1970s through to 2018. So because we moved the archive in 2019, so we moved the archive in 2020. Um, what else is there? Um, it's been interesting as well because many of our students have now gone on to record different interiors and things, doing the LiDAR recordings and creating other things. And it becomes a really valuable, because often they get very stuck into particular parts of the archive, but with this, it tells a much broader story. So, yeah, you can include interviews, you can do specific research. And so, for the contemporary architectural archive subject, it also means that, yeah, their work can then build onto something that becomes, part of a history. So, I mean, immediately it was really valuable. We could get students there because it was in between lockdowns. It's difficult to access. It's not always available. It is deteriorating, and so we have very sort of pristine view of the work. So, um, yeah, and it's one of those things that, definitely we would be doing this with any other project where we have um, for next year, we're going to look at the Granger and do something with that, because it also addresses a really interesting connection between the archive and how we communicate and interact what is in the archive. And that's something that I've been talking um, with Tim of the Granger about is, because there's a whole lot of things that, I mean, with any collection, there's a whole lot of things that are in storage because you can't show everything. But how do you start to capture sort of the richness of that? So yeah, it's been a really valuable tool for the archive subject.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, yeah. And I know, with spaces like the Granger that also are constantly changing and they have different exhibitions, if you really want to capture a moment in time, it is a great way to do that.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Okay. I might let James take over for a second.
Sure. Can you share your screen?
Sure.
Yeah. So now we're going to call on Sid to talk about the virtual site visit that was developed for Urban Open Space, the Landscape Architecture Studio, and it was also used by Studio Delta in the undergraduate architecture program. And I guess the question we wanted Sid to really focus on in particular, because he's sort of representing studio use of site visits in a way, is this issue that, unlike some of the other site visits where it's really about students engaging with content and perhaps at some point demonstrating that they have an understanding of a site, often in studios where there's a design or design brief tied to a site, I guess we wanted you to sort of reflect on the issue that students have to develop an attitude towards the site and then have that inform a design project. So there's sort of a different level of complexity, perhaps. And you saw when Sam was showing the little walkthrough there that there's videos and content like we saw in some of the other examples. But I guess what do you have to say about that whole issue of students having to sort of ultimately use the virtual site visit to inform a design, and how that works, or how well that works?
Yep. Thanks, James. Maybe to qualify and provide a bit more context. The Urban Open Space Studio is the first landscape architecture studio in the sequence that students go through. So it's also that important sequence or transition from moving from what are mainly architecture-based studios towards landscape. So, and the varying understanding of site and place. And I'm just going to throw out maybe a bit of a opinion, perhaps maybe controversial view, perhaps based on my own background as both originally trained as an architect and now a landscape architect. In landscape architecture, I like to think that what is already there is more important than what will be there. Yeah. While in architecture, what is not there yet, yeah, can perhaps be more important than what is there because of the maybe very top-down nature and imposition of the architecture project. And our virtual site visit, similar to Kirsten, I think it's very practically begun during the COVID, when students didn't have access to site. So it's essentially about giving access, to students overseas or under lockdown in different parts of Melbourne and Australia. Yeah. And just to expand on what Sam mentioned earlier, VSV is no replacement for real site visits. And like any other site representations, it's always a reduction of place. So to form meaningful understandings of place, so that deeper research and direct experiences are paramount. So we use our Flex App Fund to, sorry about that. I'm wondering if you're hearing that Aftop is trying to call me, so I'll have to hang up. So we use the Flex App Fund to facilitate and enhance deeper understandings of place by bringing in and integrating voices of stakeholders and experts in short 15 to 20 minutes interviews that you've seen that interface just now, and they're all integrated into the VSV itself. So there are other important resources that we fold into VSV. The other one that's worth mentioning is we also enhance the understanding of sense of scale through the detailed Rhino model that is based on site scan, and also the produce 1 to 200 physical model made from that Rhino model. And in design, I think whether architectural landscape, that the spatial temporal dimension is very important. And you will also see that we've integrated many of my own site videos and images from different times of days and also climatical conditions to help students understand that dimension of place. Today, I would say these resources complement and augment real site visits in students' site analysis and design processes. And I would say the effectiveness is confirmed through an ongoing research in collaboration with BEL+T, with you, James, and also Dennis of Studio Delta. So in the future, we'd like to explore further the potential of virtual site visit and all these resources for interdisciplinary learning. I think there's an opportunity there now that we have, this important overlap with Studio Delta. I'll just stop there.
Thanks, Sid. Anne-Marie wants to see more of the virtual site. Maybe when we finish going around, we can come back and yeah.
And I can always, I'll provide links as well afterwards.
Well, some are public, some aren't, right? So
yes, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, and I forgot to mention that Sam helped us produce that virtual site visit, and integrate all those materials as well. So again, thank you very much.
And it was a nice sunny day when I went, and it was cold and rainy when you went. So.
Yes, absolutely. Great contrast.
Yes. Okay, fantastic. Thanks so much, Sid. We might move on to Xavier. I will quickly share my screen. So in this example, we'll look at a slightly different technological approach. So initially, with this virtual site visit, which was led by Xavier and Adrian Chu, is of the mechanical plant room in the Alan Gilbert building. So initially, it was developed using this kind of, the 360 photography approach that we've seen, with some embedded content that you can click on. But later on, we kind of created a new version using Unity, which is a game engine. So I've got a quick video of that right here. So in this virtual site visit, kind of the user's able to walk freely throughout the space. That's what we could do with this kind of game engine. And then additionally, we created a few animations that kind of highlight processes occurring in the plant room. So with these animations, you're really able to see perspectives and processes that might not be possible when you go on the physical site visit. So, you're kind of seeing under the hood of these processes with some quite cool and nifty animations. We had about 12 of these animations at different areas of the site. Then you'd go back to walking around, exploring the site again. What we also did was we created a couple of different versions. So the version that you just saw was, we called it like the free form version, where you're able to explore the site as you wish and engage with it in kind of any order and way that you want to. And then the second version was what we call kind of the guided tour, which actually did the guided version first. And there would be a series of arrows that would kind of direct you to a certain spot. Then you would engage with an animation. So you kind of, follow the arrow around, you'd hit a certain spot, and then you'd be like, boom, now I'm engaging with this animation. And then from there, you would go to another spot, and you kind of also have questions that you would have to answer as well at the end of each spot. So Xavier, you initially used that 360 imagery approach, and then we went to, we found there was maybe some limitations, and we went to the game engine based simulation. I guess, why? What was what were the benefits of using that formula, and maybe reflecting on it now, was it worth it? Did it go as planned?
The why question is very simple. It was COVID, and we had to do something. More seriously, we had few issues with this site visit. It never been really an official visit, as there were issues of safety and access, and also it was a sensitive space in terms of security and so on. So we knew that we had to do something really quickly. We did this camera first platform. I was a bit clinky, and it was really not like the experience was a little bit disappointing. It was really sterile, really it was, we were not really happy with it. The gaming platform came, and we wanted to have something very, very important for this space is the sound. And the sound has completely changed the experience. And it was also our enemy when we do the visit. So we always had great feedback about this visit. If I meet ex-CBS student at a shop or in the street, like it happened a lot. I've done this tour for 10 years. They will always mention this tour. They vividly remember. Mostly the dust, the dirtiness, and the sound. And we wanted, well, the dust was a bit hard to reproduce, but the sound was a key to this visit. It's very, very loud, and with very a big variety of very distinctive sounds. So yeah, we wanted to expand that, and we got the money, and we had the time because we were all locked down. That's where we first met Sam. I worked with Sam for an hour and a half before to meet him in real life. So our working relationship was virtual as much as our work. Well, sadly, I haven't had the pleasure to use this platform a lot since I'm not engaged with VBS anymore, and VBS has changed a lot. I thought Adrian would have been here today to share, but the feedback from the students is positive. we are still, Andrew and I, working at trying to get some data on how efficient it is. The big drawback, as I said, was the sound. And when you are presenting and explaining complex system in a dark, dusty, really loud place, it's not ideal. The space is restricted, so people will spread along a long distance, and you can make sure that after the first people won't be able to hear and understand anything. So that was one of a big issue. Again, they will not be able to experience it as in real life, and those vibrations and dust and the space, the notion of space. Yet you can really feel it quite well on a platform. However, yeah, they should be able to have a better understanding with all these different animation, things that we were always struggling to explain on site. Like this time, it is very obvious to just peel off all the covers and explain what's happening inside. So I would imagine, but we are still like about to get some data on that. Since COVID, it has been very difficult to get access to this place, and it makes sense. But like we were visiting the mixing chamber, for example. So it's where the return air mixed with some fresh air. So basically, all air with bacteria and viruses that is in the building is going back to this room, and we were taking the students in it. So that's a place we haven't had a chance to visit since. Therefore, to be able to do a comparison, it's a little bit difficult, and that's why we are looking at different way to do it.
Yeah. And I certainly know we had some big dreams. Like we had ideas of, having 5 virtual people running around the place together and, exploring different places. And there definitely was a massive learning curve of, of trying to learn this new technology. And we had 4 minds trying to figure it out. And there were lots of sleepless nights, but I think,
And it's thanks to COVID. Without COVID, we would have not done that. Like there was no chance that we could have spent so much time building it. It was a huge learning curve. There were some games that were developed where we would because in a plant room you can manage heating, cooling, ventilation, and a lot of things in the building. So we could send scenarios to the students saying that the sensors are not working, the building is overheating or whatever. How can you manually adjust and make the building cooling, and other scenarios like that. We thought we could go to this stage, but no, like the learning curve was steep, and I'm already amazed by the result, because it is. And the funny things for you, Sam, is that you've been living and driving this place for so long, and you've never been to the real place until. Have you ever been?
this virtual one is the real place in my mind.
So you still haven't been yet to the real place. All right, well, I have to take you there.
That'd be great. Okay, thanks, Evia. Yes, definitely reliving some great memories there. Okay, so our last example comes from Renee and the lovely folk at Studio N. I will quickly share my screen again. So this example comes from an urban design studio focusing on kind of nighttime governance, planning and policy. And in the virtual site, the user is kind of exploring the Melbourne CBD at night. And in doing so is kind of engaging with content that is, highlighting, it's through the lens of kind of night shift workers and highlighting a lot of the difficulties that they face. And, you know, the interesting thing about this project was that the students were really heavily involved in the kind of design and development. So they chose the areas to be captured. They decided on certain kind of stylistic approaches, which I can kind of show a few. You know, stylistic approaches of how the VSV was going to be put together. And then they also then produced all of the content that the users would engage with. So, you know, in my mind, it was almost like a studio-wide group project is how it felt in a sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, Renee, what was this experience like of students contributing to the virtual site, of having the agency and responsibility? You know, what was that group project like, which you know, it's quite a unique circumstance in the faculty, I would think.
Sure. Thanks, Sam, and thanks for your help on it. So I'll talk a little bit about the experience in the studio, but I also want to mention how we've used this site in the research, and that's more kind of my contribution to this overall night shift project, for which the Masters of Urban Planning Studio comes out of. I think the main positive from it, and that was really noticeable with the kind of students over the semester, was that, so for the outcomes for the students in the studio was producing a report that really focused on the policy frameworks around nighttime governance and the way in which particularly occupations marked by shift work featured in that, but it was to be complemented with this creative output or a visual representation. Most of the students are coming from a Masters, as I said, of Urban Planning. Some iterations of the studio also had students from a Masters of Landscape Architecture. But for many of the students in the studio, it was their first time doing a creative output in a way, or a visual representation. And they had quite a lot of, as you said, agency in that, and they could direct that. Some of them, you know, they took to it very well, but some really struggled with that. And I think using the virtual site visits as a way to anchor that really helped them enter this creative process that many of them were very new to, and I think really helped them think about how their work and the site that they selected and the occupations that responded to that site went with other people within the group. So I think that was interesting to see how it, more so I think in some ways than them all going to their separate physical sites, it enabled them to really enter this kind of creative process of thinking about how they were going to visually represent their site in relationship to others in the studio. And then I suppose just briefly is that originally the idea was that we would use it as a tool to present both the student work and also the project leaders' work, research they've done within the Melbourne CBD, as a way of, I suppose, an alternative to doing journal papers as a way of presenting our research. And in some ways, I think that worked, and in other ways, it didn't work so well. But it has been actually incredibly useful in doing interviews with people that have worked in these sites, as a way of bringing something to the interview process of highlighting, so they can kind of move around the person that we're interviewing and have pick up on bits and pieces in the site that they might have not necessarily thought about if you didn't bring it along as a tool in the interview. So much like it's bringing a plan or a section, bringing the virtual walkthrough is actually really helped in the research process of bringing out and drawing out some really interesting asides through that process.
Yeah, fantastic. And I know that you've been talking about, you know, dabbling in creating some of these yourself, and that's a good thing with kind of using this, you know, 360-degree photography, that the learning curve to do so is actually quite small, and they're really quite easy.
I mean, I hadn't used it much before, and then used it through this process, and it really didn't take that much to kind of pick up and kind of play around with looking at a similar site in Adelaide. So yeah, it's been really useful.
Yeah, and I was really impressed because I came in a couple of times to talk to students about kind of the process, the interest and the engagement, and some of the questions they asked was really impressive, and that was a really fun experience.
Yeah, I think it paired well, as I said, with doing a creative project that they could then situate their comic or their short film in relationship to the other students in the studio, and then also see how it might come together as something that was presented as part of the exhibition. And that was very new to a lot of the students. So that, I think it was a nice anchor for all those elements of the studio together.
Yeah, often you're kind of stuck in your own project and you're not,
Yeah, and I think the students appreciated that. Yeah,
fantastic. We've got a question. Well, at perfect timing. I was going to say we can kind of move on to the Q&A if anyone's got any questions. So what technological advancements and software are necessary to bridge the existing gaps in virtual site visits to ensure they effectively replicate the real site visits? Can AR be used? If yes, how much investment is necessary in you? Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think one, maybe like the point I touched on earlier in that, do we look to replicate a physical site visit virtually? Often I don't think that's the aim. I think we can kind of accept that they have different learning outcomes and, learning opportunities, and just say, I think that, a virtual site visit complementing the real experience is the way to go, because I just don't think that it's possible to truly replicate that, multi-sensory experience of being on site. But I think augmenting a physical site visit with AR is a real possibility. And the technology is there. We haven't done much work in that space yet, but I think the technology, even we have that kind of opportunity in the faculty to do so. We have kind of ways to build AR applications, mobile telephone devices that you can kind of scroll around site and then engage with information, see videos and animations while you're on site, which is a real opportunity that I think we, as a faculty, could lean into. In terms of the investment as well, I think it's always a trade-off between, using applications and software that people have developed, for these purposes, virtual tour applications and things like that, and then building customized software like Xavier, Adrian, and I did for the plant room. When you're building these custom solutions, you can have so much more control and agency over what you want to do, but that comes with a heavy price of, you've got to learn these tools. You've got to go through the headaches of figuring out all the bugs. And I think, if there's opportunities to constantly build on your work, then that's worth it. But if it's kind of a one-off solution, then maybe it's not so worth it.
Can I add a couple things?
Sure.
I guess I would say, maybe this is obvious, but doing some sort of hybrid version where there's AR while students are on a physical site. The one major drawback of that approach, other than possibly cost, is you'd lose the asynchronous aspect where students can actually access it whenever they want or whenever they're able to, which is the key kind of equity side of this whole approach. So it's not to say that it's a bad thing necessarily, but something to consider, that the pairing of the virtual and the physical, where students can actually access something on their own time remotely, is one of the key values. So there's that. The other thing is just to say that there's AR, I guess, technically, if you think of AR, it's probably pretty complicated and expensive and all that. But if you think in sort of lower tech versions of it, where students are out on site somewhere, but they're engaging with some sort of digital content. I know, or I believe Hannah Louie, who's in the audience here, has some experience with sort of using digital devices for field work. And then Janet McGaugh, also in the faculty, has sort of a podcast kind of model where there's audio content that you listen to while you're walking on country. So those are just examples, I guess, of not that they're necessarily cheap, but they're less complicated than having to have AR equipment on site. And presumably it means that students could go again on their own time to site and bring something as simple as a mobile phone, and it's not quite, not quite so logistically complicated.
Fantastic. Any other questions for anyone? Okay, well,
Anne-Marie.
Sorry. Sorry, I'm looking at this camera. Renee, what, like, how did you film or record the area? Was it the Insta360?
So Sam did it for the Melbourne CBD one, and then I used the Insta360 in Adelaide. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just was, and then Xavier, you started using the Insta360 and then went to Unity. Kirsten, you did a LiDAR scan?
Some students had done LiDARs to capture some interiors for the Burgess project for the Catholic Theological College. So yeah, a lot of them have, I think they must have done Ben's class, and so they're also interested in sort of creating further content. But yeah, particularly with interiors, because often we just sort of look at the outside of the building and don't really think
But
beyond that.
to film the archive itself, you did Insta360?
Yeah, I did that. I
Mhm.
did it, which means anyone can do it if I can do it.
And then Sid, I'm sorry, I didn't remember. You said you mentioned what software you use, but can you just reiterate that?
Well, the Fab Lab did the site scan using the point cloud. And that was used to generate the Rhino model.
Okay.
But the site visit itself was Insta360. I think.
Yep.
I think the common thread is that there's kind of it's possible to create kind of a suite of different type of content, but you have kind of the armature that, or the as Renee called it, the anchor that sort of everything is hanging off of, to at least in these 4 instances, tended to be Insta360 until Xavier went gamifying.
Mhm.
I
Interesting.
would have a question actually for you, Sam. If you had to do it again, how more efficient would you think you would be? 10%, 30%?
with using Unity.
Yeah.
I'm gonna charge you 20% more though.
It's interesting actually, because with the skill set I have now, probably 50% more efficient. If it was me not having engaged with a project, being in 2024 now, because we have like generative AI now, and because we had to write a lot of code as part of that virtual site visit.
Yeah.
And one of the things that these generative AI tools do really well is to write code. It would honestly be so much easier. It would be not trivial, but it would take a quarter of the time, I think, to do, just because you have access to these tools that can. A lot of the problem with kind of coding these things is you run into individual problems that there's no online help to solve them. But now I can just say, hey, I've got this problem, and it just spits me an answer in 2 minutes that would have taken me 3 hours. So these customized tools are becoming more and more accessible for sure.
Well, that's really good to hear.
So we can do round 2 soon.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Any other questions?
Bridget.
Hi. Kirsten, I had a question for you.
Mhm.
I'm really inspired by this idea of the archive of the archive. And I guess I'm wondering what that affords for the students in terms of how they imagine themselves as an archivist or as part of the process of archiving. And also whether you've thought about it becoming a public or open resource.
Yeah, well, I guess I mean, absolutely. And there's been some of these that we've done with the Robin Boyd Foundation, where they also did one of Greg's archive, but that was very much sort of forward facing about some of the capacity of Robin Boyd Foundation. With ours, it is more of a teaching and learning tool, but absolutely, definitely. And I know I think with the Greg Burgess exhibition that we had in the Dulux Gallery, I think a virtual tour was made of that James Rafferty did. So yeah, it's a really, and I've lost my train of thought there. So we've used it for different things, but I think, yeah, getting students engaged with the archive so that, yeah, it's sort of the exploration of information, but thinking about what they do with that is a nice challenge for them, and gets those really interesting conversations about communication of ideas, which then sort of leads to, you know, how you present designs and who's your audience and all of that type of stuff. But yeah, it's also useful to sort of have a collection of stuff you can play with. That, you know, there's an advantage of it being a collection and not part of the archive, because I think archives and special collections are particularly protective of those things, where with this one it's just us and the spiders. So it's yeah, but I don't know if I've actually answered your question. Sorry.
No, I think you did. You
Okay,
you came across it. That's good. Thank you.
thanks.
And Kirsten, we also created a virtual site visit of the Granger
Yes,
event,
yes.
which then the Granger folks, I'll share it quickly because it's a technology that we haven't kind of seen, and it's kind of a mix of that LiDAR and then that kind of, you know, first person. So you get a model, but then you can also, you know, click a button and then go to that first person. And the Granger folk were like, oh, this is amazing, let's share it on our website. So it's public facing to some sense.
Yeah, because it was one of those ones where I knew, like, I was like, yeah, students will be really into this. It's really complex because, you know, the whole thing about the Granger is it's complicated. And none of them just like, no, we're going to do something else. I was like, but next time I'm just saying, look, these are the 4 assignments you have to do, and the Granger's one of them, because I think it's such an interesting thing where you've got those sort of, you know, contested or complicated spaces. What happens when someone's just not quite, you know, Melbourne University type of thing? I mean, you know, you've got the composer, but you've also got his whip collection. It's kinky.
The dress is splattered in blood and
Yeah.
Yeah, I was surprised by that.
Yeah. So yeah, no, I'm looking forward to that one, and yeah, and just sort of, yeah, working with, yeah, those issues around, you know, yeah, how do you show things that can't be there all the time? Yeah, how do you capture exhibitions and things? So yeah.
fantastic. Well, we've got 3 minutes, so we could squeeze one more question in if anyone's got it, or we could.
I got the question that I always ask, which is, and some of you may have touched on this, but how much was this a resource that you provide a link to students, or it sits on Canvas, and how much of it did you actually use during your synchronous teaching, like in the classroom or wherever you were, where you were actually sort of acting as a tour guide of the tour itself?
I think in my case it was both. So it's one thing to sort of, yeah, narrate your way through it, and I guess it's very similar to having, you know, a couple of touch points. One is to, you know, talk through that experience, and then people can have a look at it afterwards and figure out, you know, how, particularly with the Burgess work, how they can then contribute to, you know, what their assignment might be, to sort of, because part of the challenge of that is also asking them to contribute to knowledge, and you know, capturing things that otherwise will, you know, get stuck in a skip. So
Sid left before he could answer that question, but I know it's been something we've discussed. And Renee, I assume there was some sort of live exhibit kind of event.
Yeah, so we had it the students part of their final presentation, and then it was also included in MXDX for one iteration of the studio. But I think in answer to your question, it was really student directed. They were selecting the sites, and they had to come up with within the studio a group of sites that worked together. So they were very kind of involved in the process rather than just, I suppose, viewing it on canvas. As it was very much they were directing how we select these sites, and how they would engage with them. So yeah.
And there were multiple kind of proposals that they kind of proposed to me. So clearly there were kind of discussions and iterative development of design. Okay, well, 1 minute to go. Look, thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate everyone talking and everyone engaging, and hopefully we had a fruitful conversation. My door's always open if you would like to continue discussions. If you want virtual site visits developed, that's something that I can help you with. And yeah, have a great rest of the day.
Thanks.
Thanks,
See ya.
Sam. See ya.